Suppose you tell someone, do this task right now. There's a good chance they'll start making excuses, stalling, or trying to do it later. But if you say the same thing slightly differently, would you like to do this now or in an hour? The situation changes. The other person feels they've been given a choice. They think the decision is in their hands. But in reality, both options lead in the same direction you wanted. That is the illusion of choice. Let's understand this with a simple example. Suppose a parent tells their child, go study. The child will probably refuse immediately or say in a little while. But if the same parent says, would you like to study math first or science? Now the child cannot avoid studying because both options are within studying. Their mind is no longer focused on avoiding study. It's busy deciding which subject to study first. That is the real power of this strategy. According to psychology, the human mind needs autonomy. We all want to feel a sense of control. When we're given choices, our mind stays calm. We feel we made the decision ourselves, and that small illusion can change behavior entirely. Because sometimes the easiest way to guide people is to make them feel they are the ones in control. Law 2, the forbidden fruit effect. The human mind has a fascinating habit. Whatever is easily available tends to feel less valuable. But the moment a restriction is placed on something, it suddenly becomes extremely attractive. A famous story from history illustrates this psychology very deeply. The story of Adam and Eve. It is said that they were permitted to enjoy everything in paradise. Fruits, trees, nature, everything. But there was one tree whose fruit was forbidden. Just one restriction. And that very fruit became the most desirable of all. This is the nature of the human mind. In psychology, this is called the forbidden fruit effect. When something is prohibited, its appeal multiplies because a prohibition doesn't just create a rule. It also creates curiosity. Now look at this in real life. The world of marketing understands this principle very well. Many brands use words with their products like limited edition, for members only, exclusive access, only 100 pieces available. These words don't just convey information. They create a signal in our minds that this thing is not available to everyone. And suddenly, even an ordinary thing starts to feel special. Scarcity increases attraction. But why does this happen? The reason is a deep psychological reaction in our brain. When we feel that something is being restricted or taken away from us, our mind starts to see it as a challenge. In psychology, this is called psychological reactance, a mental response that arises when we feel our freedom is being limited. Our mind says, if I'm not being allowed to have this, there must be something special about it. And that very thought makes the desire even stronger. This is why sometimes the most powerful attraction comes not from the availability of something, but from its denial. Because what pulls the human mind most strongly is exactly what it has been told it cannot have. Law 3, strategic surrender. Victory does not always come from showing strength. Sometimes the most powerful strategy is to take one step back. At first glance, this looks like defeat. But many times, this very move becomes the beginning of real victory. This is called strategic surrender, deliberately accepting defeat for a short time. It is not weakness. It is a psychological strategy used by many experienced negotiators and leaders. This is the nature of the human mind. In psychology, this is called the forbidden fruit effect. When something is prohibited, its appeal multiplies because a prohibition doesn't just create a rule. It also creates curiosity. Now look at this in real life. The world of marketing understands this principle very well. Many brands use words with their products like limited edition, for members only, exclusive access, only 100 pieces available. These words don't just convey information. They create a signal in our minds that this thing is not available to everyone. And suddenly, even an ordinary thing starts to feel special. Scarcity increases attraction. But why does this happen? The reason is a deep psychological reaction in our brain. When we feel that something is being restricted or taken away from us, our mind starts to see it as a challenge. In psychology, this is called psychological reactance, a mental response that arises when we feel our freedom is being limited. Our mind says, if I'm not being allowed to have this, there must be something special about it. And that very thought makes the desire even stronger. This is why sometimes the most powerful attraction comes not from the availability of something, but from its denial. Because what pulls the human mind most strongly is exactly what it has been told it cannot have. Law 3. Strategic surrender. Victory does not always come from showing strength. Sometimes the most powerful strategy is to take one step back. At first glance, this looks like defeat. But many times, this very move becomes the beginning of real victory. This is called strategic surrender, deliberately accepting defeat for a short time. It is not weakness. It is a psychological strategy used by many experienced negotiators and leaders. Because there is a fascinating rule of human behavior. The more opposition there is, the more resistance is created. But as soon as the opposition decreases, people's thinking begins to change. Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine two people are arguing about an issue. If you immediately start proving the other person wrong, the argument intensifies. Voices rise, emotions get involved, and slowly, the argument shifts from logic to a battle of egos. Now, both people's goal is no longer to find the truth, it is to win. But imagine that in the middle of that same argument, you suddenly say, perhaps you were right. This single sentence changes the direction of the entire argument. The other person, who had built a mental wall to defend themselves, suddenly becomes calm. They no longer feel the need to fight. And many times they start reconsidering their own words. Sometimes they say, no, that's not what I meant. Meaning the very person who was stubbornly holding their position moments ago begins to revise it themselves. That is the power of strategic surrender. This strategy teaches us that winning every argument is not necessary. Many times, stepping out of an argument is the wisest move. According to psychology, when a person receives direct opposition, their mind immediately goes into defensive mode. They stop listening. They only try to protect their position. But when the opposition eases, their mind calms down, and at that very moment, they can become open to new ideas. This is why sometimes the most powerful influence comes not from speaking loudly, but from quietly stepping back at the right moment. Law 4. The power of silence. People often believe that being influential means talking more, speaking louder, responding immediately, always saying something in every situation. But the truth is completely different. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones never spoken. This is called the power of silence. Silence is a strategy that many great negotiators, leaders, and investigators use with great intelligence. Because silence is not just the absence of sound. Silence creates psychological pressure. Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine you're sitting in an interview. A question is asked. You give your answer, and then the interviewer doesn't say anything immediately. They just look at you. A few seconds pass. Suddenly you begin to feel a little uncomfortable. You think, was my answer incomplete? Should I say something more? And then you start speaking on your own. Many times you end up giving more information than necessary. That is the power of silence. The same situation occurs in negotiations. Suppose you name a price, and then say nothing. If the other person cannot tolerate that silence, they start speaking on their own. Sometimes they even offer a better deal by themselves. According to psychology, the human mind does not like empty space. When silence suddenly appears in a conversation, the mind treats it as an incomplete situation and tries to fill that empty space. This is why many people start speaking themselves just to end the silence. But those who understand silence know that not every question in every conversation requires an immediate answer. Sometimes a few seconds of silence is more powerful than a long speech. Because silence at the right moment doesn't just pull words, it draws out the other person's true reaction from within their own mind. This is why in the world of influence, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that makes no sound at all. Law 5. The mirror of narcissism. Every human being has a hidden desire within them, the desire to feel good about themselves. Every person wants to be understood, appreciated, and made to feel important. This very desire of the human mind gives birth to a very powerful psychological principle called the mirror of narcissism. It means showing a person their best possible image of themselves. When you show someone their ideal image, they often begin to behave according to that image, because every person lives by a story they have built about themselves. Someone sees themselves as hardworking. Someone considers themselves honest. Someone believes they're a responsible person. And when another person accepts that same story, that person tries to maintain that identity. Let's understand this with a simple example. Suppose you say to someone, "You are a very responsible person." This may sound like an ordinary compliment, but behind it lies a deep psychological effect. The moment they hear this, an image forms in their mind, the image of a responsible person. Now, they subconsciously try to behave according to that image. They will try to complete work on time. They will try to take responsibility. And they will begin to shape their behavior according to that identity, because no one wants to see the image they believe to be true about themselves fall apart. According to psychology, this can be understood through self-image theory. Our behavior is influenced by our identity. We try to become what we believe ourselves to be. So if a person is shown their best identity, they make an effort to maintain it. But one important thing must be understood here. This strategy only works when the words feel genuine and natural, because false praise is often recognized. But when a person is shown their best image, many times they begin to mold themselves into that image. And that is the real power of the mirror of narcissism, because sometimes the easiest way to change people is to show them that they are already a better person. Law 6. The ego challenge technique. Hidden within the human mind is a force that is sometimes even more powerful than logic. That force is ego, the desire to prove oneself. Every person carries an identity within themselves. They consider themselves capable, strong, and many times even better than others. This is exactly why, when someone's ego is challenged, it suddenly becomes activated. And this principle is called the ego challenge technique. The basis of this strategy is very simple. If you say to someone, "Perhaps this task is beyond your ability," two reactions are possible. Some people may step back, but many people take this as a challenge. A voice immediately rises within them. "Why can I not do this?" And at that very moment, their ego becomes active. Now their goal is not just to complete the task. It is to prove themselves. This is why sometimes a small doubt can create very large motivation within a person. Let's understand this with a real example. In the world of sports, many coaches use this technique. Imagine a player has grown tired of difficult training. Their mind is beginning to give up. Then the coach says, "Perhaps you are not ready for this level." The moment the player hears this, something changes within them. Despite their fatigue, they now try to prove themselves. They work harder because this is no longer just practice. It has become a matter of their ego. According to psychology, the human ego wants to protect its identity. When someone questions our ability, our mind sees it as a threat. And to respond to that threat, we try to prove ourselves. But this technique must be used carefully, because every person's reaction can be different. Some people are motivated by challenge. Some can also be discouraged by it. But a challenge given in the right way, in the right circumstances, has the ability to awaken the hidden power within a person. Because sometimes the strongest motivation comes not from praise, but from the desire to prove someone wrong. Law 7. The anxiety of freedom. We often assume that the more freedom we have, the happier we will be. The more options there are, the easier it will be to make decisions. But the reality of the human mind is often exactly the opposite. Interestingly, too much freedom can also create fear. This is called the anxiety of freedom. When we have too many options in front of us, our mind suddenly begins to get confused. We start thinking, which option is correct? If I choose the wrong one, will I miss out on a better option? And because of this thinking, making a decision becomes difficult. More options, but less clarity. Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine you're sitting in a restaurant. If the menu has only 5 or 6 dishes, making a decision is easy. You choose quickly. But if the menu has 50 or 60 items, you suddenly pause. You read every option, compare, wonder which will be better, and many times it takes a very long time to decide. Sometimes even after deciding, the mind is not fully satisfied because it feels like some other option might have been better. This is exactly why many modern restaurants intentionally keep a limited menu. Fewer options make the decision easier. In psychology, this phenomenon is called choice overload. When we have too many options, our mind gets tired of processing them, and that mental fatigue creates decision anxiety. The more options increase, the more confusion can also increase. This is why many times the most effective strategy is not to show all options, but to limit them. Because the human mind feels more comfortable not among infinite possibilities, but with a clear direction. And this is why sometimes the greatest freedom is found within fewer choices. Because when the paths are fewer, the mind can move forward with more clarity. Law 8. False weakness strategy. Power does not always come from showing strength. Sometimes the greatest strategy is to appear weak. This may sound strange. Our world teaches us that we must always appear strong, confident, fearless, in control. But history and psychology tell a different story. Many times, the person who presents themselves as very powerful makes others cautious. People around them become alert. They start hiding their real thoughts. But when a person appears weak or ordinary, people's caution decreases. And this is where the false weakness strategy begins. This strategy means deliberately appearing less threatening, so that the other person behaves more openly. Let's understand this with an example. Imagine 2 people sitting in a negotiation. If one person talks in a very confident and aggressive manner, the other person immediately becomes alert. They start hiding their information. They choose their words carefully. But if that same person appears calm, ordinary, and slightly unsure, the other person may open up more. They might think, this person is not that strong a negotiator. And because of this thinking, they share more information. And that is the moment where real insight is gained. Throughout history, many great strategists used this principle. Sometimes armies would deliberately appear weak so that the enemy, in their overconfidence, would make a mistake. According to psychology, the human mind is very sensitive to threats. When someone seems powerful or influential to us, our mind immediately goes into defensive mode. We become cautious. But when the threat feels lower, our defensive walls begin to come down. And at that very moment, people reveal their true thoughts and feelings. But one important point, false weakness does not mean actually being weak. It is only a perception strategy. Because sometimes the wisest person is not the one who always displays their strength, but the one who can hide it at the right time. Law 9. Constructive pessimism. We often think that the best way to motivate people is to constantly encourage them, to tell them, you can do this, you are very capable. And many times this is true. But the motivation of the human mind does not always come only from praise. Sometimes a little doubt can also become very powerful motivation. This principle is called constructive pessimism. Constructive pessimism means expressing doubt in a way that does not discourage a person, but instead motivates them to prove themselves. Imagine you say to someone, I don't think this is possible. Hearing this, some people might step back, but many people take it as a challenge. A feeling arises within them. I will prove you wrong. And at that very moment, a new energy can be born within them. Now, it is no longer just a task. It becomes a matter of self-respect. Let's understand this with a real example. Many teachers sometimes use this technique to motivate students. Suppose a student looks at a difficult problem and says, I can't do this. The teacher then says, perhaps this problem is a little beyond your level. Hearing this, two feelings can arise in the student. First, they might give up, but second, they might try to prove themselves. And many times, this second reaction brings out their hidden ability. According to psychology, the human mind wants recognition. We want people to see and acknowledge our abilities. But when someone doubts our ability, our mind can see it as a challenge. And to win that challenge, we begin to work harder. But balance is very important here. Constructive pessimism only works when it contains a challenge, not humiliation. Because the right kind of doubt, given in the right way, can awaken incredible motivation within a person. Sometimes people achieve their greatest accomplishments not because of praise, but to prove someone's doubt wrong. Law 10, implanted idea. There's a fascinating secret about the human mind. People often don't easily accept ideas that are directly told to them. But those same people hold very firmly to ideas that they feel they themselves thought of. This principle is called the implanted idea, planting a thought in someone's mind in such a way that they feel the thought is their own. Because the human mind values freedom greatly. We want to feel in control of our decisions. And when someone directly tells us what we should do, our mind often starts to resist. But if that same idea appears to arise from our own mind, we accept it much more naturally. Let's understand this with a simple example. Suppose you give your friend advice. You should do this. They may immediately say, no, I don't think so. But if you ask them, don't you think this approach could be better? Now the situation changes. Because this is no longer an order. It is a question. And a question forces the mind to think. As that person considers the question, an idea begins to form in their own mind. And if they arrive at that conclusion, they feel the decision is theirs. That is the real power of the implanted idea. You gave the thought, but they felt as if the thought came from within themselves. According to psychology, this can be understood through self-generated persuasion. When a person forms an idea themselves, they connect with it more deeply because it is not just information. It is the result of their own thinking process. And because of this, they hold that idea much more firmly. This is why many great leaders and communicators ask questions instead of giving direct answers. Because sometimes the most effective way to change people is not to tell them, but to give them the right question to think about. And when a thought arises from within a person's own mind, it becomes the strongest thought of all. Law 11, the contrast principle. The human mind does not understand things in isolation. We often only understand the true value of something when we get the chance to compare it with something else. Our mind frequently makes decisions based on comparison. This psychological principle is called the contrast principle. The contrast principle means presenting something in such a way that whatever comes before or after it is perceived differently. In other words, perception changes. Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine you walk into a shop. First, you are shown a very expensive product, priced at 10,000 Indian rupees. You look at it and immediately think, this is very expensive. Then the shopkeeper shows you another product priced at 3,000 Indian rupees. Now, 3,000 Indian rupees suddenly seems much more reasonable. Even though if you had seen that same product first, it might also have seemed expensive. But because you first saw something much more costly, your perception changed. That is the power of the contrast principle. Now, look at this in negotiation. Many experienced negotiators deliberately start with a very large proposal first. For example, if someone wants a deal of 50,000 Indian rupees, they might open with 80,000 Indian rupees. When the other person hears this large proposal, it seems like a lot. But later, when the price comes down to 50,000 Indian rupees, it suddenly seems reasonable, even though that was the real target from the very beginning. According to psychology, our mind is less influenced by absolute numbers and more influenced by relative differences. We don't see things individually. We see them in context. What was seen first can change the perception of what comes after. This is why many businesses use the contrast principle in pricing, marketing, and negotiation, because the right comparison can completely change any decision. And this is why the true value of something in the human mind is often determined not by its actual worth, but by what was seen just before it. Law 12. Controlled incompetence. In our world, skill and ability are highly valued. We are taught to improve in everything, handle every responsibility, and prove our competence. But in the real world of behavior, a fascinating psychological strategy sometimes works. It is called controlled incompetence, deliberately not appearing to be an expert at everything. In other words, in certain situations, making yourself appear slightly less capable. This may sound strange, but many times, the person who appears highly capable in everything ends up having all the responsibilities dumped on them. People think, this person can handle everything. And slowly, that person starts being chosen for every task, big or small. The result is excessive pressure and exhaustion. Let's understand this with a workplace example. Imagine two employees in an office. The first employee appears expert at everything. They complete every task quickly and find solutions to every problem. In no time, the manager begins to see them as the most reliable person, and then every new responsibility starts coming to them. On the other hand, the second employee is good at some things, but doesn't appear to be an expert at everything. Sometimes they say, I don't know this work well enough, or someone else might do this better. Slowly, people only send them the work they're truly capable of. According to psychology, people distribute responsibilities based on perceived ability. We give others the work in which we believe they are most capable. So if a person appears expert at everything, people assume they can handle it all. Controlled incompetence does not mean actually being incompetent. It could be a strategy to balance your energy and responsibilities. Because wisdom is not only in doing everything. Many times wisdom lies in knowing which work is truly worth doing yourself, and which work is better left to others. Law 13. Strategic withdrawal. There is a deep law at work in the human mind. Whatever is always available gradually loses its value. But whatever is rare, whatever is not always present, suddenly becomes more important. This principle is called strategic withdrawal, stepping back a little at the right time. It is not about creating distance. It is a psychological strategy. Because when you are always available, people start treating your presence as normal. Your presence becomes a habit, and people often begin to value less what is always there. But the moment you step back a little, the moment your availability decreases, people suddenly begin to feel your absence, and the value of your presence increases. Let's understand this with a simple example. The world of business and marketing understands this principle very well. Many famous brands don't keep their products always available in the market. They use a limited release strategy. The product is available only for a limited time or launched in very small quantities. The moment people hear only limited pieces available or available for a short time only, demand for that product suddenly increases. People rush to buy it because they fear the opportunity might slip away. According to psychology, the human mind connects scarcity with value. When something is rare, our mind assumes it is more valuable. This is also called the scarcity principle. And this same rule works in relationships, business, and the world of influence. If you're always available, people assume you always will be. But when you step back at the right time, your presence becomes valuable again. Because sometimes the most effective way to increase your own value is not to always be in front, but to take one step back at the right moment. And that very distance makes people realize just how important your presence truly is. All these principles help us understand the depths of the human mind. But it is essential to remember, influence and manipulation are two different things. Knowledge should be used not to harm people, but to understand them. Because in the long run, trust is the greatest power. Human behavior is never fully logical. Our decisions are influenced by emotions, ego, and perception. When you understand these psychological patterns, you begin to understand not just others, but yourself better too. And that is the beginning of true wisdom. Subscribe to One Book, because here we explore topics like this in depth. And remember, the greatest power lies not in controlling others, but in understanding human nature.